Now we are recording. So when we spoke about eschatology, we mentioned very often dispensationalism. And dispensationalism, it is a kind of worldview or biblical worldview. Not, I wouldn't say biblical worldview, but people who believe in God and who are mostly stand in the position of literal interpretation. And of course, the dispensationalists will not accept any kind of figurative or other reading of the book of Genesis. So they will argue for a literal interpretation of the creation story. But there is another branch of theology or another worldview, and it is called covenant theology. Have you heard about this covenant theology? Sometimes it is called a federal theology. No? Okay, so we are, as Adventists, our understanding of the covenant is very, very close to the covenant theology, but we are not covenant theologians, so we do not stand completely on this ground. So what is the covenant theology about? So why I'm talking right now about that? Because some references to the covenant theology we will encounter today when we will speak about different representatives of the framework theory. So the covenant theology says like this. In the beginning, God made a covenant when he created a man. When God created a man, he made a covenant with Adam. And one of the texts that is usually used to support the idea that God made a covenant with Adam is written in the book of Hosea. In the book of Hosea in chapter 6. And verse 7. But they, like Adam, have violated the covenant. They, like Adam, have violated the covenant. So they say that in the beginning, God made a covenant with Adam, and they called this covenant the covenant of works. So Adam was supposed to be faithful to God. He's supposed to do his job in order to be in the covenant. So the way how to stay in the covenant was to do some works, to fulfill God's commandments, to toil the garden or to work in the garden, to keep it, and to do what God prescribed him to do, not to eat from the tree of knowledge. So this was the covenant of works. When Adam committed a sin, he actually violated this covenant of works. And God made another covenant with Adam. And this was the covenant of grace. And all subsequent covenants that we can see in the Bible are actually the repetition or renewal of this covenant of grace that was done in the Garden of Eden immediately after the fall. Okay, this is clear?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, so this most of
Prof, it's clear.
Most of the theologians, or many of them, whom we will mention today, stand on this position, covenant theology. covenant of works, the first one, after that covenant of grace, and all subsequent covenants in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Actually, these are the same covenant of grace, but may be modified a little bit because of the new circumstances. Okay, so now we will discuss all of them in such sequence. Just a minute, please. So first, we will discuss Bruce Waltke. After that, we will discuss Meredith Kline. After that, we will discuss Henry Blosher. And the last one is John Walton. So why we will do in this sequence? Because you will see that we will start from the most conservative theologians, and we will finish with the most liberal among all of them. Okay? So, okay. Pastor Gemba?
Yes, sir.
Did you prepare a presentation on Bruce Waltke?
Yes. Can I share the screen?
Sure.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah, I found out that he has said quite a bit in the 10-page document. So I tried to summarize in the Word document the following. I found out that the creation account in Genesis, he says, should desperately be propagated today in the classroom as a viable option in the world of religions, because it provides foundation for all biblical teachings and worldviews. Instead of doing so, pundits continue with all alternatives except the biblical story. It is important to determine literary genre and purpose of writing of the Genesis account to determine its authenticity. The literary genre will help the reader to determine compatibility or incompatibility of the Genesis account with the scientific theories of origin. The author's purpose is then determined partly through his perception of his audience need. The Genesis creation account provides believers a firm foundation for a covenant with God, and it dispels all other gods each creation day. That is in the account of creation. It dispels the other gods that are worshipped, like sun is dispelled when we actually speak of sun being created. The Genesis account speaks to the Christian church to separate it from competing worldviews and values. It guards the pilgrims against myths of materialism, secularism, and humanism. It also fortifies against New Ageism, which fails to distinguish adequately between the Creator and His creation, right and wrong. The content of Genesis account includes a summary statement, like in verse 1, the time of creation and the negative state of the earth, and the conclusion in chapter 2, verse 1. Verse 1 of chapter 1 is adumbrated in the rest of the chapter. The mention of, and God said, shows authentic creation. It is noted since the time of Hadda that Genesis 1, 1 to 2 and 3, 2 verse 3, represents actions in 2 steps. That is, creation occurs in 2 triads. The first part is from verse 1 to verse 3, which is marched against day 4 to day 6. Some are regarded as unformed or unfulfilled. During the first, the creator separated formless chaos into static spheres. I tried to put it in the table just like he did. The first triad consists of unformed, where there is light, and the second triad is unfilled, where now there is luminaries. Sky stroke atmosphere and water. In the second triad, we have fish and other sea creatures. And then the last part of the first triad is land vegetation. In the second triad, we have fall. The Genesis account symmetrically representation of creation is magnificent literary artistic representation. Its genre is not a cult liturgy. It is not a hymn, nor a myth. It is more likely historical narrative, but presents some complex narration which suggests a figurative, anthropomorphic, and not plain language. The type of history is of a metaphorical narration. That section was my comment. The language of Genesis is not scientific. It reports the origins phenomenologically, not mathematically or theoretically. The purpose of the account is not scientific. The Genesis account does not attempt to answer any scientific questions, but it answers the questions about who and why, rather than the scientific ones like how and when. The biblical goals remain outside scientific parameters and scope. We are impoverished intellectually and spiritually by limiting ourselves to either science or non-science. Biblical and scientific accounts are validated differently. The former by the Holy Spirit, while the latter is by empirical testing. The genre is theology in substance, but a narrative of God's action. Just like Henry Blocher suggests, the genre is identification as a literary artistic representation of the creation. Science and Genesis account complement each other and cannot be reconciled. To that extent, Prof, I submit. Hello, Prof.
Yes, I'm here.
That's the much I was able to summarize.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for your presentation. And I just would like to add several words about that. And you can see that he is not going to interpret Genesis 1, but he just discusses the genre of Genesis 1, or not only Genesis 1, but about the genre of the Genesis account of creation. And what is important for us today is to understand how he perceives the genre. And do you see that Bruce Waltke is, how to say, he has like two opinions. On the one hand, he wants to say that it looks like it is a historical narrative, but on the other hand, he says, no, it is not a historical narrative. Yes, and he presents several arguments why we cannot understand, why shall we not understand it as a historical narrative. So I don't want to show all the slides. I'll just show some of them. So he agrees with Blocher that it is a magnificent literary artistic representation of creation. So he agrees that it is a literary representation of creation. So it is not a historic representation, but it is a literary. And if it is just a literary representation, so it means that it cannot be necessarily historic. and why he believes it is not historical. And first of all, and this is the argument that we will find is very, very important for them, how they see Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Blocher, for example, speaks about 2 tablets. And all of them say about the contradiction in these 2 accounts. So why the contradiction? Oh, for example, in Genesis 1, all plants were created on the 3rd day. But in Genesis 2, we can see that the sad was planted, and it was planted, it looks like after Genesis day 3, after the day 3 of creation. Or for example, in Genesis 1 account, we can see that animals were created, and after animals were created, men were created. Men and women were created. But in Genesis 2 account, what we can see, Adam was created. After that, animals were created. And after that, woman was created. So do you see the sequence is not the same? Also, he has an argument about the Garden of Eden. That about the Garden of Eden, it says that it was planted. And if it was planted, not created, yes? Because if it is created, so it means that it is created like with all trees, with everything. But the word planted means that it was planted and it grew. It grew. So in this case, he says that trees couldn't grow in one day. And all of them use this argument about light and luminaries. So they see contradiction between creation of light in the 1st day and the sources of light in the 4th day. And also he says that the language of the 1st chapter is very figurative. It employs anthropomorphic language and so on and so forth. So based on all these arguments, he says that account of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 as well cannot be considered a literal account, I mean a historical account, but it is just a literary representation of the story of creation. Okay, do you have any questions about Bruce Waltke?
I only have concerns.
Yes, please.
Because he appears to contradict himself when he says that the creation in Genesis 1 shows that God could not have created the way it narrates. That maybe this is just a representation of what he actually did, but maybe what he did was, it's like he's supposing a fiat creation. It's like he's saying that God used some kind of progressive creation. So I'm concerned that what exactly does he mean? Because he appears to be supporting the Genesis account, while at the same time poking holes in the same account.
So the idea of Bruce Waltke and many others of them, Bruce Waltke actually and Meredith Kline are very conservative. So they do not believe in age theory, or they do not believe in gap theory. So they do not speak about the evolution, but actually their understanding and their interpretation of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 opens door for evolution, for any kind of evolution. But they do not stand on the position of evolution. And I agree with you that they are really very contradictory. And as for me, one of the contradictions in this account, in their theory, is that they not consistent with their literal and figurative interpretation. because do you see, they say that it is a figurative language.
Yes.
It is just a literary device. 6 days of creation, this is just a literary device which is used by the author. All this implies that actually it is not a historical narrative, but it is just a story about creation, something like this. For example, like a writer writes a biography of some person, and to make this biography more attractive, he changes some things or adds something that probably didn't happen in the life of the person, but to make it attractive, or he presents it from a different angle, so to make this story more attractive. So in this case, do you see this contradicts the basis of the creation story? So they wanted to be historical, but on the other hand, they don't want to be historical. And this is a tension. Especially it is clearly seen in the presentation of Blocher, because he wants to be historical, but he is not historical.
Definitely.
Okay?
Yeah.
So any other questions?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
Yeah, from the last slide you removed, we all come with our various personal biases. I was believing that Bruce Watke was a conservative biblical scholar.
He is.
He is. All right, but these things he pointed out as contradictions, the open ways for people to believe in evolution and to doubt the power of God, that trees cannot grow in one day. That is a denial of God's power or what God do.
On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, we can see if he says that it is a figurative language, why can we say that God planted a garden could be also a figurative language? Yeah. So.
Yeah, things like that.
And do you see, even in his presentation of Genesis 1, it seems to me it is in his presentation, he says, he quotes Gleason Archer or somebody else who said about 6th day. So there are a lot of things happened in the day 6. Like, for example, God planted a garden. God created man. After that, God created all the animals. Adam gave a name to all the animals, and after that Eve was created. And he says it is impossible to do everything in 24 hours.
It does doubts God.
Yes, it is not an argument, but and he even doesn't use it as an argument, but he uses it as an exclamation. So he says, so it contradicts the logic that so much things happened in one day, in 24 hours it is just very difficult to put everything in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Let us. Yes.
It is not quite clear to me what's the genre of Genesis.
Oh, when he speaks about the genre, he discusses several of them. Like, is it a hymn? Is it a historical account? Is it anything else? And let me open it. I don't remember how he comes. Let us read his conclusion together.
He seems to say that is closer to a historical narrative, but not fully. So you see,
so yes, conclusion. The 16th century Belgian Confession states, we know him by two means. First, by the creation, preservation, and government of the universe, which is before our eyes, as a most elegant book, wherein all creatures, great, small, are so many characters leading us to see clearly the invisible things. Okay, so let us skip it. Now, these two books about creation complement one another, but they cannot and should not be harmonized. With the one hand, we salute Henry Morris and other creation scientists for their yeoman work in the pointing scientists to the creator through their researches in his creation. Creation poses humans to the creator. Genesis 1 defines him as Israel's sovereign God. These two books clash when scientists, so he speaks about restitutional theology. Let each book speak its own language and be appropriately exegeted and exposited, and let each in its own way bring praise to the Creator, the God, the Father, and the Lord Jesus Christ. So he doesn't answer the question. On almost every time he says, for example, he asks a question, is it theology? And he says yes, for it treats divine matters, but in style, no. Yes. Before that, he asked a question.
Ibrahim, no.
Science, again, he says yes, and he says no. Okay. When he speaks about history,
Yes.
cult liturgy, is it a cult liturgy composed for a New Year festival? Of course, he says no, because cult liturgy, it is idea of Zygmunt Mowinckel. He everywhere wanted to see cult liturgy. So he just rejected this idea about cult liturgy. A hymn, hardly, for the poetic mode, the liturgy, the linguistic convention, and so on. So he doesn't agree. History. Is it history? Yes and no. So do you see, when he discusses the genre, he didn't give the answer. For every genre that he discusses, he says either no, or he says it is yes and no. So in this case, it is not clear, and he doesn't give answer to this question. Anything else? Okay. So what shall we do? Shall we make a break, or shall we continue with the Meredith Klein?
Maybe a brief break would suffice, Prof.
Okay, so let us make a break. So in this case, I will show my own presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Prof.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Meredith Klein, he passed away, so he's not among all of them. All of the proponents that we discussed today are still alive except him. So he died in 1990, it seems to me, or beginning of 2000 years. So he is the main proponent of this theory. And his theological foundation of this theory he elaborated this theological foundation, and actually what we can see, all other scholars, they just follow him, follow what he said and what he taught. So what are the main assumptions of this framework theory? So the main assumption is that the days of creation in the first chapter of the book of Genesis are not presented in a chronological order. So the best way how we can understand them, as he says, is thematically. So they are put together thematically, but we cannot understand them as sequential days. Furthermore, they believe that these 6 days are solar days. So he speaks about solar days. So he doesn't believe in day age theory, but he speaks about solar days. But taken as a whole, the total picture of the divine work week is figurative. So this is how they present the first chapter. So this is a figurative or literary presentation of the creation account. Also, the temporal framework has a non-literal meaning. The events narrated within the days are real historical events of divine creative activity. So do you see what they deny, that the sequential order of the days are not, the order of the days are not sequential, and they are presented just topically. So topically, they correspond to each other somehow. For example, on the first day of creation, God created daylight and the alternating cycle of day and night. The divine naming of this phenomenon, day, establishes its permanent meaning and significance both during and beyond the creation period. On the very first day of creation, and from that moment on until the sun is replaced by the immediate light of the divine radiance in the eschatological new creation, the created reality day has existed. Nothing in the text leads us to hypothesize that the light of the first 3 days was some undefined supernatural illumination different from what obtained after the creation of the sun on day 4. Arguably, the use of the terms day, evening, and morning, which presuppose ordinary solar process, dictate that the first 3 days are in fact solar days. So what they say, that these are solar days, and they actually, later on we will see that they say that it is thematically luminaries or celestial bodies were created on the 4th day. But it doesn't mean that it was, the sequence was like this. So they will say that the celestial bodies, all the luminaries were created before the light was created. So the light of the first day is just ordinary solar light, nothing else. Okay. Yes, but what about the 4th day? Does not the fact that the luminaries were created later, 4 days after the creation of day and night, prove that the first 3 days were non-solar? That is one possible interpretation of the 4th day, although the difficulties raised above would still remain. Why did God name these allegedly sunless days, complete with sunset and sunrise? Another explanation, which we believe to be more plausible, is that we have here an example of temporal recapitulation. Oswald Alice explains it. Okay, we will omit it. Taking our cue from Alice, it is possible that when Moses comes to the 4th day of creation, he returns to events that had already been narrated on day 1 to describe them in greater detail. Okay, so actually, sometimes we see people say that on the 4th day, atmosphere became transparent, but Meredith Klein even doesn't tell like this. He says that actually we cannot say about different days. It was done in the same day. But for literary purposes, it was divided on 2 different days, but everything, light and the luminaries, were created in the same day. Day 1 narrates the creation of light and its basic physical result, the establishment of day-night cycle. Day 4 returns to the same event to narrate the divine creation of the solar mechanism that stands behind the results of day 1 as their physical cause. This interpretation would explain why the first 3 days seem so ordinary without so much as a hint that they existed apart from the sun. So this is his interpretation of this sequence of the days. Confirming the plausibility of this approach is the presence of similar parallels between days 2 and 5, day 3 and 6, just as days 1 and 4 are very closely related, dealing with the light and the luminaries. The other remaining days also reveal strong parallelism. Day 2 narrates the creation of the firmament, which divides the waters above the firmament, the clouds in the sky, from the waters below the seas. Day 5 is thematically linked to the sky seas of day 2 in an unmistakable manner. On the fifth day, God creates the denizens of the seas and of the sky. Likewise, on day 3, God forms the dry land, which will be inhabited by the living creatures of day 6. And the vegetation, to what creature of day 6 does the vegetation corresponds? Man. The linking of vegetation and man anticipates the close connection in Genesis 2 between man and tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which will function as the probationary element of the covenant of works. So do you see again, the covenant of works is here because, as I told you, most of the people that we are discussing now are representatives of the covenant theology. Most modern commentators recognize the validity of this two-triad structure. Yes, this is the structure that he's speaking about. And we also, actually, this structure is very old. The first person who noticed the structure was somebody by the name Herder, and he lived in 18th century. So this representation of the days of creation is very, very old. But what Klein did, he actually, Meredith Klein. So he actually added something to this representation. Usually when we speak about the same two triads, we speak that this is the response of the state of the earth, which is described in the verse number 2 as tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu, which means formless and empty. So the first 3 days is the making a form of the earth, and the second 3 days is some inhabitants. So it is inhabited now. But he, Meredith Klein, made a little bit different emphasis. So what he says, first triad speaks about creation of kingdoms, like kingdom of light, kingdom of sky and seas, kingdom of dry land, and the 3 days of creation, next 3 days of creation, create kings, like for example luminaries. Let me read. Verse 14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will serve as signs for seasons and for days and years. There will be lights in the expanse of the sky to provide light on earth. And it was so. I'm not sure. In my translation, there is no word dominion. Do you have any word related to dominion? Like luminaries should have a dominion over light or over day and night.
Let me check.
I have to divide day and night.
Divide.
Yes.
Yes, to separate, to
There is
divide.
no term for ruling the day or ruling the night.
Ruling the day, there is no or there is?
There is no term, except in vernacular. I've seen some resemblance of ruling, but in the English, no.
Let us check Hebrew text, because we see we are not interested in translations. Vayomer Elohim Yehye Me'orot Barakia Hashamayim.
Yeah, it is there in verse 16. Sorry.
16?
Verse 16, then God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night.
Yes.
Verse 16.
Mashal. The
Yes,
word that is
mashal.
used there, mashal.
Yes, it is mashal, which is to rule.
Okay, so what we can see, there is an idea of ruling or dominion. So that is why Klein says that here the kingdom was created, and here create kings, as he says. So those who will rule over day and night. So can we find the same in the day 5?
Actually, in day 4 is repeated twice in verse 16 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So God created. Then God said, let the waters swarm with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So God created the large sea creatures and every living creature that moves and swarms in the water, according to their kind. He also created every winged creature according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. God blessed them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. Evening came, and then morning, the 5th day. So I cannot see here anything about dominion, but maybe...
No, it is not there.
It is not there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But anyway, it looks like maybe those sea creatures, they exercise dominion somewhere in the sea, because it's not a dominion of man. Man is not there. Maybe there is this idea behind this. And of course, at the last day, man is created, and man should exercise dominion over all the creation. Okay, so this is the main idea of him. So creating kingdoms and creating of kings. And of course, they also they pay special attention. Yes, the creator king. Yes, the special attention is given to Sabbath. And Sabbath they explain in a very, very different way, much differently than we do. Okay, let's continue reading. This deliberate triad structure or literary framework suggests that the several creative works of God have been arranged by Moses under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in their particular order for theological and literary rather than sequential reasons. So by saying this, he actually says that it is not any sequential, there is not any sequential order of the days, but it is just theological and literary reasons why Moses put them in this order. For this reason, we believe the days of creation week are figurative framework, providing the narrative structure for God's historical creative works. So from this idea, the name of theory came, framework theory. So the days provide a framework, but it is not sequential. These are not sequential days. These are just literary convention to provide some theological ideas. One might still argue that day 4 need not be taken as a recapitulation of day 1, proposing instead that God could have sustained day and night for the first 3 days by supernatural means prior to the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. But Genesis 2:5, and this is also an important issue, and in all this interpretation, Genesis 2:5 plays a very, very important role. But Genesis 2:5 rules out such an explanation and further strengthens the link between days 1 and 4 in a figurative framework. So why do they emphasize this verse, Genesis 2:5? Let us read it, because it's very, very important verse. No shrub of the field had yet grown on the land, and no plant of the field had yet sprouted, for the Lord God had not made it rain on the land, and there was no man to walk the ground. So do you see the main idea is, he says, for the Lord had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to cultivate the ground. Then in verses 6 and 7, we are told how God dealt with these exigencies. In verse 6, the absence of rain is overcome by the divine provision of a rain cloud. Rain cloud began to arise from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. And in verse 6, the absence of a cultivator is overcome by the creation of man. So usually the representatives of this theory, they speak that because the rain and some other issues are mentioned here, so they say that there was no change in the physical laws. So the physical laws from the very beginning until the very end are the same. They are not changed. And because of this, we cannot speak that day 1 and day 4 represent some different creations. And the light from day 1 to 3 is not the solar light, but some supernatural light. Notice that Moses offers his audience many years ago a perfectly natural explanation for the absence of vegetation. The Israelites would have been familiar with the idea that some form of water supply is necessary for plant growth, whether God sent rain or man-made irrigation. So when Moses states that God didn't create vegetation until he had established the natural means of sustaining that vegetation, rain, a cloud, verse 6, he is assuming that the Israelites would recognize the logic of this situation based on their own experience. The very fact that Moses would venture to give such an explanation indicates the presence of an unargued presupposition, namely, that the mode of providence in operating during the creation period and that is currently in operation are the same, since the mere giving of a natural explanation presupposes providential continuity between the creation period and the post-creation world. We may infer a general principle applicable beyond the case of vegetation, that God ordered the sequence of creation acts so that the continuance and development of the earth and its creatures could proceed by natural means. In other words, during the creation period, God didn't rely on supernatural means to preserve and sustain his creatures, once they were created. Do you understand this? Is it clear?
Yes, but
Is it okay?
this
Is
means
it the Pastor
Yes,
Gabriel
Prof, is clear.
first.
I'm saying I'm hearing everything you're saying, but I'm not getting clearly the main assumptions. What the impact they have with the real account of Genesis.
What have impact?
The assumptions of that man that talked about the framework theory.
Do you see what they want to say? In this theory, they actually, this is the way how they interpret the account story of the creation story of the book of Genesis. So their main idea is that the days, also they say that the days are literal days. They stand on this position, especially Meredith Klein. He says that these are literal days, but the sequence of days are not the same. And this is just a way, so this is the figurative language, how we shall understand Genesis 1. So it doesn't mean that in the first day, God created only light, but most probably in the beginning, God created, first of all, he created sun, stars, moon, and everything. And after that, he describes the creation of light. And they also argue that the order of events, like, for example, when man was created, when vegetation was created, is not, it was not done, for example, in day 3 or day 6. But the parallel account of creation also tells us something about creation order. And this argument they just use in order to prove that there is no sequential order between the days. Why? Because from the very beginning, God didn't use supernatural power in order to sustain the world. But verse Genesis 2:5 says that actually God relied upon a natural mechanism like rain or rain clouds or man's work when a man toils the ground. So that is why they say it is impossible to speak about the creation of vegetation before the provision is done for taking care of it.
Yeah. So, Prof, in that case, are they exegeting the passage, or they are providing a possible explanation of the existence of that passage? Because if they are saying that you cannot have animals, for instance, before you provide for enough time for vegetation to grow, and not just within one day, are they not denying the ability of God to make these things to appear at once?
This is the question. So this is a big question for them. I don't know how they understand this. Do you see, this theory is very, very tricky, because their proponents on the one hand tries to keep a literal interpretation, try to be as historical as possible, but on the other hand, they just deny the literal interpretation, and they try to make some other sense of it.
That's why it's confusing to me. It's as if I'm not understanding clearly.
Okay, let us continue. Or somebody else wanted to say something.
Professor.
Yes.
I think on the hindsight, it's also a response to the avalanche of scientific approach to the interpretation. They want to bring in the logical a theory that will minimize on the difficulty that the science has with the expression in the biblical sense. So I think they are trying to reconcile themselves in interpreting, and at the same time feel they are provided a more. When I read Bloch, I noticed that it is that attempt. They're looking for a more logical explanation that can avoid find illogical to reconcile when they use more of a scientific approach as well, and many others.
Yes, so it is true, especially for Blocher and for Walton. So they really, I don't want to say they're really concerned about how to reconcile. So it is not the major concern, but how they interpret the Genesis, the book of Genesis, actually opens the door to any kind of evolution, theistic evolution. Yeah, Meredith Kline is not very much concerned with the reconciling scientific approach and biblical account. So it is not his main idea. But Blocher really tries to do that, but he says that we cannot rule out the possibility that there were a long period of time of the creation. So he agrees upon that. And when we speak about Walton completely he goes very far in his interpretation of the book of Genesis. Okay, and anything else?
Yes, Prof. You mentioned Walton. We just began to read his book.
Did you enjoy it?
I did, but
you don't agree with him.
I don't agree with him at all. I don't.
Yeah.
He seems to make room for theistic evolution.
For everything.
He's a Catholic. Everything goes for him.
Yes. So he interprets in such a way so that any kind of evolution could be accommodated.
Could come in.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But yes.
Prof,
even killing, much as even this, the one who I was assigned to read, Killing.
Kline.
Yes, Kline, yes. Also, I don't see him as okay, I saw in him, he supports a lot of science. His interpretation is science-based than the literal interpretation found in the Genesis creation account.
Yeah, but these two guys, Waltke and Kline, are the most conservative among all of them. So they try to be in the conservative ground, but of course, how they do this, it opens doors for everything else.
That is it.
Yeah. So let me continue.
Okay.
With this principle in hand, we now return to the problem of daylight and evenings and mornings prior to the sun. Although the sequential view attempts to explain this problem by hypothesizing that God sustained this natural phenomena by some non-ordinary means for the first 3 days, this speculation of human reason is contradicted by the disclosure of divine revelation that God employed ordinary means during the creation period to sustain his creatures. Thus, we are cast back upon our original suggestion that the 4th day is an instance of temporal recapitulation, narrating the creation of the normal physical mechanism God established to sustain the daylight-night phenomenon phenomenon throughout the creation period and beyond. Genesis 2:5 necessitates a non-sequential interpretation of the creation account, and non-sequentialism in turn demonstrates that the week of days comprises a figurative framework. So this is actually their main assumption, that the days of creation is just a figurative framework for explaining what happened. So now, very interesting how they explain the Sabbath, or God's rest on Sabbath day. The final exegetical observation, by the way, Pastor Gembo asked about, do they use exegesis? They use exegesis, but do you see, we can use exegesis in different ways. And sometimes you can make conclusions based upon limited information or upon something else, and your conclusion could be wrong. So look how he explains this. The final exegetical observation that ultimately clinches the case is the unending nature of the seventh day. On the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which God had created and made. The seventh day is unique in that it alone lacks the concluding evening-morning formula, suggesting that it is not a finite, but eternal. So look at this one. So they say that the Sabbath day, or seventh day, because it is not called Sabbath day in the creation story, should be eternal. Why? Because it doesn't have a refrain, evening, morning. Further cementing this impression, the author of Hebrews equates the seventh day of creation with God's eternal rest, my rest. When he writes, also, his works were finished from the foundation of the world, for he has thus said somewhere concerning the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works, and again in this passage, they shall not enter my rest. So do you see, the main idea is God rested, so it was his rest on the seventh day. And after that, when Apostle Paul speaks about Joshua and about all the people of faith, he later speaks about people of faith, but in chapter 3, he speaks about the Israelites. And he says that they were not able to enter my rest. So it means that God's rest continues. Okay? So he rested on the seventh day, and this seventh day continues. It doesn't stop until now. God is still resting. Okay? Hebrews interprets Psalm 95 in light of Genesis 2:2. Although the works were finished from the creation of the world, that is, also God's own rest has been a reality ever since the conclusion of the sixth day of creation, yet it is incumbent on the covenant community that they not passively assume that their participation in God's rest is a fait accompli. Rather, they must be diligent to enter that rest by mixing the gospel message with faith. So this is the interpretation of the Sabbath. And of course, it is completely different from our understanding of this day. Okay, and this is important because you can see the same idea will be repeated in Blocher. Blocher just picks up this idea and also elaborate his interpretation upon this. And Walton as well uses the same idea. Although I don't think that this Klein and Waltke and some others enjoy what Walton wrote about creation, but evidently Walton also uses the same ideas, the same principles about the framework theory. God's rest is an eternal, ongoing reality to which the covenant community of all ages is called to enter. It began on the seventh day of creation, and so, according to the terms of the covenant of works, Adam was called to enter that rest, as signified by the weekly observance of the Sabbath after the divine pattern. The eternal divine rest continued after the fall, and so the offer was reissued in the covenant of grace on the basis of faith. But the wilderness generation failed to enter because of unbelief. The divine rest continues in the new covenant administration of the covenant of grace, for the church is called to enter it today by responding in faith to the gospel message. Evidently, God's seventh-day rest did not end with the sun rose on the first day of the week. It continues even today and will continue for eternity, when the elect, who by sovereign effectual calling had been granted rest entering saving faith, are ushered into the eternal Sabbath rest of God at the blessed appearing of our glorious rest giver, the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is interpretation of the Sabbath. In the seventh day of creation, if the seventh day of creation is not a literal, finite day measured by the sun-earth relationship, which defines our experience of time, it must belong to another temporal arena. So here, when he speaks about the day, he needs somehow to reconcile the idea of days with the idea of time. And what he says, actually, that those days are real days, but they are not our earthly days, measured by our earthly time. But this is God's time, so it's not our earthly time. If the seventh day of creation is not a literal, finite day measured by the sun-earth relationship, which defines our experience of time, it must belong to another temporal arena. The divine Sabbath rest must not be viewed from the earthly point of view, as if Genesis 2:2 were merely telling us that creative activity ceased on earth, though that is certainly true. Now, no, in Genesis 2:2, the veil is parted that we might behold a heavenly scene in the invisible world above, God's royal enthronement in the heavenly sanctuary. Thus, as Klein writes, it is heaven time, not earth time, not time measured by astronomical science. And here, as I see, is also a contradiction. Why? Because he says that it is actually a real day, solar day. But here he wants to say that it is not a solar day, it is not our earthly time, but it is a heaven time. So do you see there are a lot of inconsistencies in this theory? And if the seventh day marks the passing of heaven time, then the whole picture of God's performing his creative work within a week must be heavenly and thus figurative as well. The two-triad framework underscores the theological import of the days, marked off by the six-fold evening-morning refrain and brought to their climatic zenith in the seventh day of rest, as forming a grand picture of God's creating with a sabbatical teleology in view. The 6 days of creation have no independent earthly meaning, apart from the concluding capstone of the seventh day, which completes the sabbatical picture and gives it meaning. Thus, to arbitrarily sever the seventh day from the preceding 6 by asserting that the seventh day is heavenly, while the 6th day are earthly, is to sever the head from the body, leaving a truncated torso of 6 days emptied of eschatological significance. So you see here they try to do the same idea about the heavenly Sabbath rest, but on the other hand, they say that it is also the earthly days. The fourth commandment has been appealed by the critics of the framework interpretation as proof that the creation days are literal. However, this argument presses the relationship between God's work-rest pattern and man's too far, as if the two are identical rather than analogical. The weekly cycle of works and rest appointed for man may still be modeled on God's work week of creation, even if the divine archetype is calibrated according to heaven time. So they speak about like two timelines. One is for people and another for God. And we cannot speak about heavenly time. So, of course, this creates some room for day-age theory, but of course they do not cling to this theory. And yes, this is an important issue. What do proponents of the framework interpretation teach concerning evolution? Before answering this question, it should be pointed out that the framework interpretation itself is limited to the exegetical question of whether the picture of God's performing his creative work in a week of days is literal or figurative. So evolution is logically a separate issue. However, in today's climate of debate, it is best to be clear on this point to avoid misunderstanding. Klein states explicitly that he understands Genesis 2:7 to exclude an evolutionary scenario for the origin of man's body, since that text makes clear that the same act of divine inbreathing that constituted Adam in his specific identity as the image of God also constituted him a living creature. Divine revelation, therefore, rules out the possibility that God impressed the divine image on a pre-existing biological organism. So it looks like they rule out any possibility of evolution, but when we read Blosher and Walton, we can see that they actually open the door for almost everything. Many critics of the framework interpretation are concerned that though the current defenders of the view do not expose evolution, a figurative approach could eventually lead down the slippery slope to macroevolution. But this fear would only be justified if the figurative view were adopted in spite of the text, out of the desire to achieve harmony with science. While God's revelation in nature and God's revelation in Scripture can never be in conflict, since God is the author of both. God's revelation in Scripture has presuppositional priority over natural revelation. Thus, if there is an apparent conflict, the only role that natural revelation can and should play in the interpretive process is to serve as a warning flag, suggesting that our interpretation of Scripture may need to be re-examined. We reject as invalid any interpretation of Scripture which achieves harmony with natural revelation at the price of sound exegesis. All biblical interpretation must conform to the analogy of Scripture, which is the ultimate touchstone of exegetical validity. Those hermeneutical presuppositions flow from sound Reformed principles and ensure a correct handling of God's authoritative self-revelation in Scripture. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation about Meredith Klein. And Pastor Kajura, maybe you would like to add something?
Prof, I just want to ask, when I was reading, he used the word like the upper and the lower. cosmology. Sometimes he was calling it the two register. And was he meaning the heavens and the earth?
Honestly, I'm not sure, because I read the article of Klein, but I don't remember. I remember that he mentioned upper and lower, but I don't remember in which context. And his article is quite a little bit difficult to understand, because he uses a language which is sometimes confusing.
In fact, I was going to comment about that. He uses a very difficult language, you know, which is
true,
not good for research. A bit ancient, you know. He wanted more to be known more of being a language man than even a research.
Oh.
Hey. You have to go to the dictionary to discover some words, the meaning. But he used the Proverbs 8:22, and to him, I discovered that one of his main arguments that what we are seeing today existed before, but God just revealed them in the 6 days sequence. So that's what I understood. I don't know whether I was overboard, but because even when he's talking about light, he tells you that this light existed because in heaven it represents the heavenly glory, you know. So, but when that time came, God had to reveal it. So to me,
yes. So do you see, one of the presuppositions is that the physical laws didn't change.
Yes.
So the same laws exist in nature from nobody knows how long they exist. So this is one of their presuppositions.
That's all, but the article is very difficult. As you said, it needs to be read and reread and reread. That's when you can pick something.
Blosher is also is not an easy reading. But Walton, it is very easy to read him. He explains everything very clear, but the problem is it's very difficult to agree with what he is saying. Okay, anybody else, would you like to add or ask or discuss?
But Prof.
Yes.
Is there any scientist that tries to use science and they agree with the Bible 100% without, you know?
Of course. Wow. There are many.
Okay.
Yeah, and
so far the ones we are
yes, there are many scientists who believe in the Bible and what the Bible says, and even our church organizes scientific conferences on creation, and we do it quite often. And I remember I was on one of such conferences, which was held in Utah, in the United States, and many of Adventists, so they gathered together both scientists and theologians to discuss all those issues on creation. And some of the presentations were very, very interesting. By the way, this very famous, our scholar, not scholar, scientist, Ariel Roth, he wrote a lot of books about evolution, about creation, not about evolution, about creation. And he explains everything based on the Word of God. And he is a young earth creationist. And there are many others.
Okay. I've picked interest in the book of Genesis, but it is also confusing when you go into it deeply. The way people comment, and they feel like they have, you feel like they have a point, yet they are contradicting the Bible. So at times I say, maybe I just leave the book and remain with my faith.
Yeah, but we study all these issues in order for us to understand that we have different approaches to the Genesis account of creation. And do you see, especially this approach that we discussed today is not a scientific approach. So people who suggested it are theologians. So this is their way how they read the biblical account. And they come to these conclusions. And so our task is to analyze their assumptions and to see what is their weak position. And the most important for us is to analyze the text of the Bible and to see what the Bible says about all those issues. Okay, so do you have any other questions, any comments, any discussion? Is it clear, the position of Klein? Is it clear for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Prof.
So now, can we go to Henry Blosher?
Yes.
Pastor Nicholas and Pastor Nathan, can you present anything on his position on interpretation of Genesis 1?
Well, can present what I have, then can get the contribution from others and maybe from you also.
Okay. So if you have presentation, you can share.
Is it sharing the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
It's halfway. Let me try to enlarge it. What's happening here?
If you can read, just go ahead. We'll see.
Oh, okay. Are you able to see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This is what I got. I did not, was not able to go very far. I went up to chapter 2, in the beginning of chapter 3, just perusing through to see the general view of what Henry has. The book attempts to provide a self-consistent and biblical of Genesis. Now, Blocher's book begins with approaching Genesis. That is the first chapter, where he takes a survey of inspiration, genre, language, and the relationship of this with science. And so one of the things that I saw there is that he argues that there is nothing mechanical about inspiration, that God, in whom we live and move and have our being, in order to move men, has no need to turn them into robots. His word is fully their word expressed in their language. I think this is the idea of inspiration and revelation. And how I understood that, it's like it was not about dictation or something, but God allowed men to express his word using their language, maybe their understanding and the culture of the day, something like that, something which I found more or less the same as what we almost close to what we believe as Adventists. Blocher argues, rejects anti-scientism, fidelism, and concordism. Instead of taking one of these, he sees scientific opinions as what he calls ministerial servant role in relation to the scripture. Thus, in reference to Judges 9:7, he says, our knowledge about trees plays a servant role. It helps us discern the literal genre, hence the meaning. For Blocher, science can never act as authority or impose itself into a text, and texts should not be made to speak about things outside their contextual purview. A quote I took from page 26 says, we have the right to bring our prior knowledge of reality to bear only as far as we can presuppose it is in the human author of the biblical text. We have no right to go over their heads in order to set forth a divine meaning, which they would never possibly have imagined, even if those men did not grasp the whole import of what they attested. Kind of is saying, what is written should not be, we should not attempt to go beyond that. Blocher argues that Genesis is rather than being merely poetry or prose, instead an exalted sympoetic language. In page 32, such that it can both speak of history while at the same time using metaphorical and or figurative language. And there I had a question which I asked. I thought I would get the answer from Waltike, but it seems it still stands. Clearly, the question is, what is the genre of Genesis? I want to believe probably when we go to the exegesis, maybe we'll be able to understand, but that is the question I found. I could not understand the genre, and from Waltike also, I'm still hanging. I need to know more about that. And so the second chapter of Blocher's book tackles, then I discovered here it approaches, I think, one of 24-hour days as a gap between then the third which sees the days as ages. And lastly, he talked about the framework theory, which he sees the days as logical and literary device. And I discovered that just as you have put it, he advocates for the fourth, which is the framework theory. That is where I reached with my reading, and I wish to make it open for any discussions or additions.
Yeah, maybe we can ask Pastor Nicholas. Maybe Pastor Nicholas can add something.
Maybe he's still looking for Museveni.
Pardon?
Maybe he's
I am
asking. Okay, is there?
sharing some.
Okay.
I am going to add something little to what my pastor is able to. Apart from adding, what I also observed with the am I on?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are, Brother
Thank you.
Tamazir, you are on.
What I observed also, according to Bloch, she says that hermeneutically every approach carries its own presupposition, and one cannot be totally free of them. And therefore, we must take a text as it presents itself within the greater biblical whole. And for him, he argues that the flow of the text is creation, fall, redemption. And as my brother has already mentioned, he says there's three theories that respond to the argument between Bible and science: concordism, scientism, and fideism, which of course concordism points out the harmony between scripture and the discoveries of modern sciences. And so they point at the discoveries of science to ascertain the validity of the text. And scientism, he argues that it's against the elevation of science to religion, and fideism separates faith from other elements like geology and paleontology. And therefore, he says we must deal with them apart. But for him, I think his main crust was that the Bible remains authoritative, and the other branches of interpretation act as the servant to the Bible to bring some additional insight, but they should never dictate their authority upon the Bible. And in terms of the literary framework, which he argues, I think I noticed that he says there are two tablets. One tablet has the 7-day frame, and the other tablet, which runs from Genesis 2, verse 4b to 3, I think, is it 24? That one is arranged also in 7 symmetrical paragraphs that are arranged in a V form. And between these two tablets, the creation of man has substantial agreement. And therefore, he also notes that the correlation, what links the two tablets, when you look at Genesis 2:4, is the inversion from heaven and earth to earth and heavens. And so that symbolizes a change of perspective from one tablet to another. In terms of genre, he seems to agree with those who argue that there is a composite nature, that the use of symbolic numbers 10, 3, and 7 is predominant in that section of the first. For example, it says 10 times we find God said. And therefore, for him, quoting Beauchamp and arguing with him, the Decalogue forms the framework of the text, that number 10 and its aspects. 10 times, 3 times relating to this, to man, and then 7 relating to animals, and all those aspects. And therefore, the interpretation, according to him, must cling solely to the text and its context. And so he proposes 4 positions on Genesis 1, and he says that the degree of the likelihood of their validity goes in their descending orders. In other words, the first one, which is the reconstruction theory, which argues that the gap between Genesis 1 and 2 was as a result of a catastrophe due to the fall of the devil and his actions. So creation in Genesis 1 is a reconstruction of that chaos catastrophe that happened, which he argues is not to him valid. The concordist theory, which sees days as epochs or long periods of time, he also does not fit in well, but he thinks it has some strength. Then the literal interpretation, days of 24 hours day, he has a problem with this one, and that's why he sides with the fourth one, which is more what we are discussing, the framework that views the logical and literary aspects of within the text as a method. And so looking at the framework theory, when I read, this is what I picked. It says the week of creation is an artistic arrangement, a modest example of anthropomorphism that is not to be taken literally. Author's intention is to bring out certain themes and provide a theology of the Sabbath. From such a writer, supremely able in art and with good manipulation of numbers, especially 7, you would expect the sort of method which is discerned by the artistic interpretation. And therefore, we should rid ourselves of the deep-seated feeling once and for all that figurative language is inferior to literal language or somewhat less worthy. And therefore, he argues more for the figurative language. And in his conclusion, he says the use of the anthropomorphic figure of the week for the logic of creation and of its completion allowed the author to outline a theology of the Sabbath that was the theme closest to his heart. The narrative has two peaks, mankind and the Sabbath. This would be better expressed by saying that the creation of mankind crowns the work, but the Sabbath is its supreme goal. The theology treasures of the framework of the Genesis days come most clearly to light by means of a literary interpretation, which is the other name for the framework theory. The writer has given us a masterly elaboration of a fitting, restrained anthropomorphic vision in order to convey a whole complex of deeply meditated idea. And so for him, he finds it more figurative rather than a literal, and is arguing strongly for us to view it in that way. And in that way, we look at themes rather than the chronological flow of events. Professor, that is briefly up to page around 50 that I was able to run to and pick a few ideas.
Thank you very much.
But I think it's main something. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Anybody else would like to ask or to add or to comment, to discuss anything? So what we can see, do you see if we speak about Meredith Kline? So he tries to be conservative. He doesn't want to entertain any evolution theory in his interpretation of the book of Genesis. But Blocher already tries to do this. So actually also he speaks about the days of creation, but he allows more bigger periods of time. So Henry Blocher, yes, sorry for this. I will not show all the slides, only some of them, so that we can emphasize some of the ideas. And this is what already Pastor Nicholas mentioned, that one of the reasons why he believes that the language of Genesis 1 is figurative is the usage of these numbers like 10, 3, 7, and that is why he says that it is a kind of literary arrangements, literary devices that are used here, and it is not a literal account. And he also says that Genesis 1 is a kind of a hymn narrative. So this is the question of genre of Genesis 1, the question that Pastor Nathan asked. But I immediately want to tell you that actually the genre theory, especially recently, has been criticized. And what is interesting, it has been criticized by postmodern philosophers. Such philosopher as Jacques Derrida, actually, he says that it is impossible to speak about a pure genre of any passage or any literary work. But he says that any literary work can dwell in several genres at the same time. So do you understand what I'm talking about, or what he wants to say? Like, for example, yes, if you see a movie and the genre of the movie is mentioned, like it could be like drama, detective, thriller in the same time. So it could be the same genres, but the same piece of literature or movie could belong to different genres at the same time. So that is why it's very difficult to speak about the pure genre. And he says that it is like an elevated narrative or hymn narrative. And he speaks that the author's intention is not to supply us with the chronology of origins. It is possible that the logical order he has chosen coincides broadly with the actual sequence of the facts of the cosmogony, but that does not interest him. He wishes to bring out certain themes and provide a theology of the Sabbath. So do you see again, they speak about the theology of the Sabbath, and they even put it higher. So they say that the Genesis narrative has two climax. One climax is creation of man, and another climax is the Sabbath. So it looks like Sabbath is the main goal of God, and of course we cannot agree with this. This hypothesis overcomes a number of problems that plagued the commentators. It recognizes ordinary days. Do you see here? Recognizes ordinary days, but takes them in the context of one large figurative whole. The differences in order between the two tablets no longer cause difficulties, neither does the delay in creation of the stars, nor does the confrontation with the scientific vision of the most distant past. And I highlighted what he says, that there is this idea that we use figurative language or figurative this framework means that now there is no contradiction with the evolution theory, because he says if we accept this theory, we do not worry about the scientific vision of the most distant past. So everything could be accommodated here. But again, he speaks about the ordinary days. So it is like ordinary days, but on the other hand, it is not ordinary days. To put it plainly, both the genre and the style of Genesis 1 prologue, as our introductory chapter saw them, provide strong grounds for presuming in favor of the literary interpretation. We discern a composite literary genre skillfully composed. We admire its author as a wise man, supremely able in the art of arranging material and very fond of manipulating numbers, particularly the number 7. From such a writer, the plain strive for meaning, as in two-dimensional prose, would be most surprising. And Pastor Nicholas gave the same quotation. From such a writer, you would expect the soil of method, which is discerned by artistic interpretation. The more it appears that the biblical writer used a stereotype from his cultural milieu in presenting creation in the form of a week, the less likely is it that he limited himself to transcribing a chronological sequence. So actually everything, what he wants to emphasize, there is no chronology in those account of creation. And the same argument actually he uses about day 1 and day 4. So he speaks that there is no chronology here. And in this case, he agrees with Meredith Klein that most probably day 4 is a recapitulation of what happens on day 1. And again, as Meredith Klein, he speaks about the importance of Genesis 2:5. It is a necessary implication that in Genesis 2:5, Scripture supplies the proof that the week of Genesis prologue is not literal. This proof has not been refuted. The omission of the formula of the evening and morning is deliberately for day 7. The most simple and natural conclusion is that, drawn by Augustine, the day was never finished. As far as the author is concerned, it is still continuing. God's rest signifies the completion of creation and the conditions for history to proceed, since mankind may act on the basis of laws that have been permanently established. And again, the same idea that the laws that we have right now were from the very beginning. So God didn't change physical laws. They existed forever. As a proof that God's Sabbath still continues, yeah, this is a very interesting argument. And Walton also uses the same issue. Do you see in the New Testament, we can see that Jesus says that my Father is still doing. So he's still creating something. And in this case, this statement of Jesus actually, it looks like contradicts the idea that God rested on Sabbath day and this Sabbath day continues until today. So it looks like it contradicts this. So do you see how he explained this? Accused of breaking the Sabbath law because he had healed the paralytic, Jesus pleads that he is working as his Father is still working. Following the principle, whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. Jesus' reasoning is sound only if the Father acts during his Sabbath. Only on that condition has the Son the right to act similarly on the Sabbath. Jesus stresses, my Father worketh even until now. God's Sabbath, which marks the end of creation, but doesn't tie God's hands, is therefore coextensive with history. Our Lord himself did not see the seventh day of Genesis as a literal day. So do you see he tries to avoid this problem by saying that actually when God rests, it doesn't mean that he does nothing, but he continued to create. But in this case, it looks like it doesn't make sense that God rested. So what is the sense of resting on the Sabbath day if he continues creating something? But anyway, so this is their logic. And the theology of the Sabbath, Sabbath relativizes the works of mankind, the contents of the 6 working days. It protects mankind from total absorption by the tax of subduing the earth. It anticipates the distortion which makes work the sum and purpose of human life. And it informs mankind that he will not fulfill his humanity in his relation to the world which he is transforming, but only when he raises his eyes above in the blessed holy hour of communion with the Creator. The essence of mankind is not work. So we probably agree with this final statement that the essence of mankind is not work. And also he links a Sabbath with the image of God. Man should imitate God, God rests, and man should rest as well. In such a manner, he imitates the Creator. Image of God. He speaks about this the same, but I would like to skip it. What is important, what he is saying, he says about the historicity of Adam and Eve. So he tries to be conservative. It is as the father and mother of human generation, of all living, that Adam and Eve figure in the narrative. The mention of their posterity makes this clear to anyone who might not have grasped it. The genealogies that follow will give further confirmation. Adam is considered, therefore, as a character who lived in the past. The events in the Garden of Eden must affect all human beings in the same way as the deeds of the patriarch influence the destiny of their descendants, from the face of Abraham to the preeminence of Joseph, with the sole difference that the role of the head of the human race is unique and more decisive. Now, this idea supposes that he is situated in time at the very head of the race. So actually, he agrees that Adam and Eve were historical personalities. And in this case, he is still conservative compared to Walton, who actually also says that Adam and Eve were historical personalities. But in fact, he says that Adam is not only Adam. Okay, we will speak about Walton a little bit later. And the fall, his interpretation of the fall is very interesting because he speaks about the fall in the terms of sexual misbehavior or misbehavior, sexual misbehavior. Why he says about this? Because do you see he emphasizes that in the narrative, what we can see, what happened in the narrative after the fall, they dressed themselves. People dressed themselves, and why they dressed themselves? They just covered those places that made them different. So that is why he sees, and he brings some other arguments to show that the fall is somehow related to a sexual sin or something related to sex. The man who wishes to be like God is ashamed of this visible reminder in his body that he is not self-sufficient. He makes himself a loincloth to bridle the formidable power of sexuality, over which his mastery is all the more diminished because sin has overthrown the hierarchies in nature. He needs the discipline of dress to permit the will to regain some control over the situation. If men and women cover themselves because they feel themselves vulnerable beneath the eyes of each other, it is not so surprising that they hide what differentiates them. Since sexuality gives their impoverished relationship its specific form, each can be apprehensive of being no more than a sexual object for the other. So this is his interpretation of the fall. Yes, and we can also speak about some other issues about Blocher, but actually his position is very, very consistent, more or less, with the position of Meredith Klein. And some of his interpretation is very interesting. And he is French, so he's European, and because he's European, he likes to quote some other philosophers like Kierkegaard, Paul Ricoeur, and some others. And it makes his book not an easy reading, but anyway, it's an interesting reading. But of course, we cannot agree with all of his conclusions. So he's more like tries to use philosophical language to explain what is written in the book of Genesis. Okay, do we have any questions?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
First of all, I'm very surprised to see that a scholar also is believing this village notion that Adam and Eve, they sinned through sex. Anyway, how do he reconcile that God had sent these people to procreate, to subdue? How are they supposed to have children and subdue if it was sex? How do they try to reconcile that?
I don't know. He doesn't say anything about it. Actually, he says that sexuality is something good. He doesn't say anything wrong about it. Yes, but he says that the temptation and seduction, so woman in the New Testament says that Adam was seduced, and this word implies a kind of how to say, like sexual seduction, something like this. So he doesn't explain it what it was, what kind of sexual misbehavior took place in the Garden of Eden, but he just says that all the details, like covering their body, the language, the desire, everything speaks about some sexual misbehavior, but what kind of misbehavior he doesn't explain.
Of course, sexual misbehavior has only one way.
Yes, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, if it was sexual misbehavior, who misbehaved? Is it in form of adultery or fornication?
No comments. No comments.
No comments about that.
Yes.
Did he put any source of his scholarly work, or just what he thought?
So, Pastor Bioma, it's better if you just read one chapter of this work on when he explains the fall, the relationship between Adam and Eve. And you can see, so you will not listen from my mouth, but you can just see what he is speaking about.
Yeah, to me, he sounds allegorical as well as philosophical.
Yeah,
know,
yeah. So
how did he know that they covered only their loins?
Yeah, we do not know. Yeah, it is just, you see, the problem is, no, it is not the problem, but his approach, as I told, is a little bit philosophical. And philosophy is not an exegesis. So he tries to combine exegesis and philosophy. For example, it's not an easy reading. Jacques Derrida, French philosopher, also French philosopher. Derrida is, it is very difficult to read him, very, very difficult, because his language is extremely saturated with different allusions to many philosophers. And if you don't know, it's like, do you see, it's like a language of the Book of Revelation, when the author of the Book of Revelation alludes to Old Testament books. And if you don't know the sources of allusion, you cannot understand what he's speaking about. So the same we can speak about Derrida. So his language is very difficult. So he wrote an article, not very long, but like an essay, and about Babylonian Tower. And when you speak, when you read this article, so it looks like he tries to analyze the article, but he uses so much philosophical ideas. So it is not an exegesis. It is just his interpretation, but his interpretation so philosophical, so that it doesn't connect it to the text at all. So I think that, of course, Blöcher is not like this. His interpretation is more or less in exegetical frames, so he keeps it strand. But anyway, sometimes he tries this, uses this philosophical ideas. Yeah. Okay, so our time is almost over for today, and we don't have time to discuss John Walton. But I hope Pastor Abioma and Pastor Oladosu will prepare a good presentation for us for Monday. And I have several questions for you. The question number one, on Monday, because tomorrow is Friday, I don't think that it makes sense for us to have a class tomorrow. What do you think? It's a day of preparation.
It will squeeze our time for preparation for the Sabbath.
Yes, so that is why I suggest that we don't have class tomorrow in the afternoon, but we can have class on Monday, and we can have class on Monday in the morning.
Yes.
So I would like to ask what time is convenient for all of you?
10.
10 Kenyan time.
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask Pastor Obioma and Pastor Oladosu.
Yes, Prof.
So because we have two hours difference, so is it okay for you to have class started at 10 Kenyan time? So it means you will have 8 in the morning.
It's okay.
It's okay. Okay, so in this case.
Yes, Prof, it's okay for us.
Okay, so on Monday, we will meet.
Yeah, 8 in the morning is okay for us.
In the morning, Kenyan time. So one more question. Is there a volunteer to prepare devotion on Monday?
Yes, Prof.
Or Pastor Abioma, maybe as a captain of the class, you can make a schedule. So because I can forget about this, but
okay.
Okay.
For the devotion.
Yes. You can include myself also in the schedule, so I will be. Okay,
Pastor. Our class chaplain does that. Pastor Opeyemi. He does the schedule for devotional talks.
Okay, so thank you for this. So on Monday we will finish. With this framework theory, and I would like you to read more about what John Walton says, because actually his analysis is very liberal. I mean, he brings some very weird ideas, for example, about the creation was done during the creation, not only one Adam and Eve were done, but it was like a massive creation, and many people were created, so we cannot speak about only one person. And many other ideas that he brings in his analysis, brings forward. John Walton, if you know his books, you will notice that he wrote very prolifically about some ancient Near East background. And when you read his book, you will see that actually he very much influenced by ancient Near East books, theories, and ancient Near East creation accounts. So that is why it is not surprising that he relies very much upon ancient Near East understanding of some issues. Yes, but except this, maybe on, I don't know what is better. So we have two options. We can discuss creation out of nothing, or we can discuss quite a small topic. Let us take this quite a small topic. That is about creation as a combat. This is also, let us take this topic, and I will send to you a book and one very short article. The short article is very short, it's just one page, and it is not something special about it. And it just states that it is a liberal approach to the creation account, but the main idea is that there were two creation accounts. Likewise in the ancient Near East. So in the ancient Near East, you can see that in Enuma Elish, creation took place through a combat. After the combat, Marduk created the world. This is one approach to creation. Or you can look at the Atrahasis epic or Enki and Nunma epic. And in those epics, there was no combat, but it was like a just normal way of creation. So they decided to create people because of they need a substitution for the hard work of the gods. Some scholars say that there are two, in Hebrew Bible, we can find also two different versions of creation story. One creation is a creation which is written in Genesis, and this is just a normal creation. But another creation is like a combat creation, very similar to Baal and Yam war, or very similar to Marduk in Enuma Elish story. So let us discuss this approach as well on Monday, and I will send you a book where you can find the information about this. Okay?
Can I ask something, Prof?
Sure.
Apart from what you have sent to us in the email, is there any other resources in the Moodle that is already accessible?
What other resources do you mean? So I forgot to give you a link to the folder.
Yeah, because I've been checking
wow.
out and I'm not seeing anything.
I'm sorry. So this week is very difficult for me because I have to teach in the morning and in the afternoon. And because of that, I can forget and I can just, something can escape my memory. So, okay, I will do it immediately. I will immediately give you a link to the folder And by the way, in this folder, there is one book which I found very, very interesting. Let me, just a minute, please. Yeah, creation and destruction. And David Tsumura is the author. So this is a monograph, and in this monograph, what he is doing, so we discussed all those issues about ancient Near East, and many scholars say that there are some parallels between ancient Near East account and biblical account. So what he is doing, he tries to analyze these points of comparison, like for example, tohu vabohu, yes? And he tries to understand the etymology of these terms, the usage of these terms in Ugaritic, and the usage it in the framework of Genesis 1. At the same, he tries to understand waters in Genesis 1, because we see Tiamat and Tehom. Many people try to find some parallels here. And actually the conclusion that he does is that Genesis 1 and 2 do not have any, so the author of the book of Genesis didn't borrow those ideas from the ancient Near East, because it is completely different. And so this is, do you see Exodus, a Canaanite dragon myth in Genesis 1-2. And he discussed many other ideas, and he came to the completely different conclusion that we cannot speak about the borrowing. Okay, so I will give you the link, and this link I will put into the Moodle, on the Moodle. By the way, Pastor Nathan, as far as I know,
Yes, Professor.
you have access to Moodle, so all of us are on board.
Yes, Professor.
Yes, and one more thing that I would like to discuss with you is the quiz. So we should have several quizzes, 2 quizzes. I put 2 quizzes. And I don't want it to be stressful for you, and I know that for some of you it is a little bit stressful. So what I will do, I will give you 2 attempts to do the quiz. And on Monday, I will discuss with you what will be in the quiz, so you will be prepared. Okay?
Excuse me, Prof. Hello,
Yes.
Prof.
Yes, I'm here.
I believe that there are not 2 attempts like the ones that were in the eschatological quiz.
Oh, what was the problem with the eschatological quiz?
It was so tricky, and 15 minutes, by the time you scratch your head, they are over. Then you do the second attempt, the average is put, and before you realize you have a 2 or a 0.
Sorry about that, sorry. Actually, it is
that-
not my purpose to fail you. It is not my purpose to fail you. Okay. So,
Yeah, I know, Prof, but sometimes some like that one, you know, 1 word answer you scratch. By the time you scratch your head, 15 minutes are over. You do the second attempt. I would request that maybe even 30 minutes. 15 minutes was too minimal, and
yeah, it depends on number of questions. And so, how many minutes do you need per question? Okay, we will come to this question on Monday, okay?
Yeah, we'll
Yes,
discuss it.
Prof, I request we discuss that on Monday.
Thank you.